what I said earlier about doing something special involving the Casagrandes characters for next week's Loud House video, judging of how Disney had released a new show this month, and it gave me inspiration ahead of time before the first episode came out. Yeah, I'm going there.
Oh.
No! Welcome to my world.
Just to get this out of the way before we head into the video itself, about me planning on comparing the Casagrandes to Primos, even though my original plan was to use the last mission, Relatively Chaos, which is the debut of the Casagrandes characters, and comparing them to the Primos characters, which I assume is going to be the first episode, which I'm hoping it's a 22-minute episode. Last week's video was literally one of my first Halloween Mania videos that I did, which was back in July. And the second batch that I did of Halloween Mania was literally around the time where I got the information while Disney is gonna release Primos in January instead of October. So yeah, for anyone who's been mostly confused, here's your answer. So I'm gonna do the video of the Casagrandes' debut appearance from Season 2 of The Loud House and comparing it to the premiere of Primos in January. Granted, I'm not sure if it's going to happen on a Sunday, it could happen on a different day, but at the same time, these types of things happen rarely to me, mainly the first time of the Camp Coral vs. We Baby Bears project that I did last year, even though I would have done it in 2021 during the summer. Anyway, let's get into the comparison video itself. The Loud House Road Trip episode from Brad to Ross, and the Casagrandes episode Let's Get Ready to Rumba. When people watched the Loud House episode, and even before it came out, people have complained about it on being too similar to the Season 2 episode of the Casagrandes, Teed Off, which I compared it to the Season 2 episode, Cheated by the Dozen, earlier this year. And to tell you the truth, I understand that you probably want me to compare the Loud House episode to that Casagrandes episode, but to tell you the truth, as much as I understand that this is a watered down version of Teed Off, I don't hate this episode even if I don't like it. I mean, it's not good, but at the same time, it's not bad. And believe me, Let's Get Ready to Rumble from the Casagrandes, the fact that it's similar to this episode along with the Casagrandes teed off only for it to be a lot more worse is really saying something. But let's talk about the plots of these two episodes. The Loud family arrives at the Southwest State Fair where they encountered a familiar face from Rita's point of view. And it's a person that she came across during camp, which was before she married Lin Saul. His name is Brad, who is used to be Rita's old camp crush, who is now a celebrity in the State Fair, which causes Lin Saul to get jealous. Now let's get into the Casagrandes episode. Rosa learns that some of the people in the apartment are going to dance class, and this is an opportunity for her and Hector to do a romantic dance together, considering that that's what Rosa wants. But unfortunately, Hector is focusing on the game that he watches from time to time, mainly the soccer game, which infuriates Rosa to the point that she's gonna go solo. The dancing instructor is what really causes Hector to be really jealous, knowing full well that Rosa is enjoying her time at dance class, knowing full well that the dancing instructor is a really great dancer. And the dancing instructor is Ivan. While not being a celebrity like Brad from the Loud House episode, he is really talented at dancing. And to tell you the truth, that's literally all I have to say involving the plots involving these 2 episodes, because even if you may say that the Loud House episode is really a watered down version of Teed Off, this is mainly a huge downgrade in that from that Casagrandes episode. Look, even if I really had the chance to review this episode again for the sake of comparing it to the Loud House episode, I'm just gonna say this right now. With this episode coming out first, it really feels like that the Loud House crew are literally just focusing on the relationships of introducing the new character that is better than the boyfriend slash husband, which for me personally is somewhat a little overrated, even if I still found Teed Off okay. I'm just gonna say this right now. This type of plot just doesn't bug me like what other people have been addressing. Like, I understand that this show's history of repeating episode ideals is really, really infamous, but to tell you the truth, after watching this episode from the Loud House in the road trip arc, even if I didn't watch all the episodes, other than this in Bizarratorium, this show, or this universe in general, doesn't take romances or husband or wife's relationships seriously. Mainly the ideal of getting married and staying together to the point that they don't take any of this seriously. Mainly on the fact that Rita, even in reality, isn't into Brad, since that she knows that she is married to Linsaw. But when it comes to Linsaw's point of view, he's not taking the marriage seriously. That's mainly my point, is that this, along with the Casagrandes episode, Let's Get Away to Rumba, they don't take marriages seriously. Yes, I understand it may be crazy to think about, but to tell you the truth, since that multiple characters have crushes towards other female characters, or vice versa, and then we witness this episode where Linsaw thinks that Brad is gonna be taking Rita away from him after reading an album that involves Rita's name in 3 songs. It honestly feels like that he's not taking the marriage seriously, and to tell you the truth, even if this episode is better than the Casagrandes episode, the problem that I have with it is that they don't know how to handle Linsaw's character in Season 7 and onwards. Like in a Bug Strife episode where he's just trying to carry the episode by himself, which is somewhat a risk that is somewhat plausible. To tell you the truth, I honestly felt like that there was nothing else to work with involving his character, unless if there was some surprises along the way. Granted, you may say that his arc is complete in the Cooked episode from Season 3, but to tell you the truth, there are still nuance, but since that there are no nuance involving Linsaw's character in the later seasons, it really feels like that he is the least to work with in comparison to the other characters. But keep this in mind. The credit that I can give Linsaw from the Loud House episode is that he tries to one up against his opponent. Because in the Casagrandes episode, Hector is incapable of running up anything, to the point that his character in this episode, Let's Get Away to Rumba, from beginning to end, despite the good deed that he did towards the end, it didn't make me convinced that he is any better than any other character. In fact, the knowledge that I have involving the marriage involving Rosa and Hector is that they just aren't really connected close to each other due to Hector's inability to see what is really going on and being way too selfish. Usually I don't cringe a lot, and even though people may cringe on so many things that they can't stand, keep in mind I rarely cringe. And when it comes to this episode, I was cringing from beginning to end after rewatching it. This episode really feels like an actual filler episode. Like other Casagrandes episodes, even if you may say that they're a filler, they at least try to have a purpose. And with this episode, they somewhat have a purpose, but it's mostly ruined to the fact that Hector is really badly written in this episode. In the Loud Tales episode, however, Linso is jealous, and I did say it that this show or universe doesn't take marriages seriously, but at the same time, it really feels like that they're at least trying to make this episode entertaining, since that Linso is at least trying to run up against Brad. And to tell you the truth, even if you may make the argument that Linso is selfish, he isn't too selfish in comparison to Hector. Like, when Bobby was just trying to run up against his opponent, sorry I forgot his name, during golf, he was cheating, sure, but at the same time, he was just making sure that he was able to win back Lori's heart, because they were in a boyfriend/girlfriend relationship, not a a marriage relationship. Even if I understand that in that episode, it's mainly a different story, considering that it's Bobby taking the spotlight instead of Lori, I felt like that in that episode, it was mainly just for a way to ship Lori and Bobby closer, even if people are just not into the ship in general. When it comes to this, considering that it's mainly a marriage relationship to the point that Linso is thinking about this way too hard, which for me personally, I would understand his motivations. To tell you the truth, he is nowhere worse in comparison to Hector. Like, I understand that none of this will ever happen in the real world, considering that whenever someone is gonna be cheating on the other person in a marriage relationship, it's mainly behind closed doors. This episode is somewhat of an equivalent of shipping Linso and Rita. Granted, it's not doing the same ways in comparison to Teed Off, considering that I'm gonna get to a problem of this episode later on, but in all honesty, that's really what it feels like. Even if I'm not into the shipping of marriage relationships when it comes to Linso and Rita, all the while, if you want to include Hector and Rosa from the Casagrandes, it really feels like that the people's knowledge in this episode is mainly Linso just trying to win back Rita's heart, even though at the end of the day, it's not really the case. But let me tell you, regardless of what Linso did later in the episode with the assistance with Lincoln, keep in mind, Hector is still no better, considering that, like I said earlier, he can't run up against anyone. His only motive is just to sabotage what is happening, and considering that this show has a bad history of sabotaging in season 4 and onwards, it really shows that this is by far the worst sabotaging, considering that Hector is not even trying and he isn't even thinking this through. He dresses up as a health inspector by lowering pigeons inside the dance studio in order to have it to shut down, and to tell you the truth, in comparison to what Linso did towards the end of the Loud House episode, he may did worse in comparison to Hector, but at the same time, Hector is still not thinking this through. I understand that he's not supposed to be smart, it's supposed to be his character on being dumb, which is supposed to be humorous, but at the same time, knowing full well that in the last episode, well, Bobby's insecurities and his stupidity somewhat worked out for how the episode ended up becoming okay, is not doing the same favor with Hector, knowing how it's impossible to see him as the good guy when Rosa is literally the good guy. Or the good woman in this case. Since the dance studio is shut down, the entire group decides to do the session inside of the Casagrandes apartment. And to tell you the truth, I understand that this is supposed to be humorous, but I'm sorry, I did not laugh at this whatsoever, and I slightly cringe. I mean, granted, it's not as cringy as the other moments in this episode, but at the same time, I just don't like these types of jokes. If anything, it just really shows how predictable it's gonna be once Hector is being revealed that he was faking on being a health inspector, which leads to Rosa being understandably upset. If there's one way to describe of how much that this episode irritates me for how cliche it is, by being way too much in comparison to other episodes, there's always a limit when it comes to doing multiple cliches, and to tell you the truth, this episode is one of them. I really didn't like the final minutes of this episode because it just literally does nothing, and the lesson that Hector learns just didn't work out for me, knowing full well that he is just so ungrateful and so unlikable throughout the majority of this episode that his reward towards the end just isn't worth it. If you ask me, if the characters were swapped, where we have an understanding of the characters a little bit more, then I may say that this would actually work. Because in all honesty, this type of format involving these characters and the episode itself just didn't work out, and it just drags this episode way lower in comparison to the Loud House episode. For the final minutes of this episode, Lin-So teams up with Lincoln in order to swap Brad's horse with a bull named Stomper in order to get back at him after hearing that he might be stealing back Rita from him. Considering that I've stated that this is debatably worse than what Hector did from the Casagrandes episode, it's mainly causing harm towards Brad, which for me personally, it's a lot more extreme, and considering that Bobby from T-Dog didn't cause harm towards his enemy, knowing full well that he's just trying to beat him at golf, just goes to show that this is a little overboard. But considering that what Hector did in the Casagrandes episode is difficult for me to root for, Lin-So in this scenario, even though that what he's doing here is far worse, it somewhat makes up for it because he is risking his life to save Brad after knowing that his horse was named Rita. To tell you the truth, even if Lin-So is pulling a Jimmy Neutron thing, well, Jimmy Neutron messes something really badly and he has to fix it, even though it's done differently in that show, you can actually admire Lin-So's confidence on just trying to help out Brad by not getting injured. Because believe me when I say this, just by seeing Lin-So in this scenario, I can guarantee you that Hector wouldn't even do that. Granted, there was the Battle of the Grandpas episode, but that's a different story. The ending of this episode, while being similar to the Casagrandes ending, which I'm gonna get to soon, it's still good on its own, considering that it's somewhat of a duet between Lin-So and Brad. And even though that, judging of how that the majority of the episode is just Lin-So having the wrong ideals on what's really going on, and he goes a little too far, keep in mind, it really feels like that if he didn't sacrifice himself while the other characters did it instead, I can guarantee you that you wouldn't have an ending like this. Believe me when I say this, with the amount of times that characters get the wrong ideals, it's usually done poorly, but when it came to this episode, the final minutes actually saves it by being not one of the worst episodes that I've witnessed from the World Trip arc. Granted, that doesn't automatically mean that it's better than the other World Trip episodes, but at the same time, I didn't watch all the World Trip episodes. Besides, even if I did compare the Loud House episode to Teed Off, I'm pretty sure that the Loud House episode would have still beaten the Casagrandes ending regardless, even if the majority of the Casagrandes episode is mainly the first time they ever did this type of formula. In Let's Get Away to Rumba, it really feels like it's just shoehorned in because it's just too difficult to take the story seriously since the Hector is the main character. I know I haven't talked about Ivan throughout the majority of this video since I only mentioned him once or twice, but to tell you the truth, since that he's mainly a dance instructor, he doesn't have anything else other than just being in a huge misunderstanding, considering that Hector is mainly getting the wrong ideas, which is similar to Lin-So, but at the same time, it's far too cringy for me to handle. I know I didn't talk about Hector's friends aside from Sergio, who did sabotaging, but to tell you the truth, since that they're mostly there for moral support, I'm pretty sure that they are literally the only characters that are mainly there for the sake of having dialogue for Hector. Mainly Hector having dialogue with, considering that they just don't do anything else. Believe me when I say this, this really feels like that the entire episode focusing on Hector's situation is mainly just his friends just trying to be the moral supporters, even though at the end of the day, if you cut them out, nothing would have changed. There is one good thing about Let's Get Ready to Rumba that is something that it does better in comparison to the Loud House episode, and that's Rosa herself, since that she wants to dance with her husband Hector in a romantic dance, since that's her dream. But at the same time, with the majority of the episode really just damaging the goodwill of what this plot would have been involving Rosa, since that she doesn't do much in this episode other than just being a tool for Hector, it's honestly disappointing. But to tell you the truth, it's still better in comparison to how the Loud House episode has portrayed Rita. You see, the thing here is that with Brad, who used to be Rita's camp crush during childhood, Rita doesn't do much other than just dancing with Brad in a warrior dance, and that's literally it. And through the majority of the episode, she's just basically like the other characters, mainly the Loud siblings, just enjoying that Brad is doing much more better when it comes to anything else in particular, and she doesn't do much in this episode. This is literally the same problem from Bizarratorium, except that we're supposed to take this seriously when it comes to marriage, even though that the universe of the Loud House doesn't really take marriages seriously. If you really want me to take marriages seriously in this show, then actually do it a lot more better by having Rita taking the suspicion from Lin So a bit serious, considering that it really feels like that they'll really fall apart. Similar to Elastigirl and Mr. Incredibles from Incredibles 2, which, for me personally, those problems really become a lot more common the more I watch critique videos centering around that film. And it's also the fact that Rita is basically like Fiona from Shrek 2, and despite being a great movie and a great sequel, it doesn't change the fact that the problems in that episode centers around Fiona not doing anything whatsoever, which is the same thing as what Rita is doing in this episode. I have read the road trip synopsis of the other episodes, and to tell you the truth, with Rita having less focus in those episodes, aside from the final episode, I've got the impression that this would have been the perfect opportunity to see what she's capable of, involving her old camp crush during childhood, because the fact that we don't get a flashback or anything, this is honestly a missed opportunity. And like I said, Lin So just isn't the type of character that is being a lot more usable in comparison to the other characters. As far as I'm concerned, this episode just really feels like a bland Lin So episode rather than just being something really good. But if we're gonna be completely real, if the Casagrandes still continued to this day and it has a mini-series like the Loud House's road trip arc, where it centers around this type of format of Rosa going to walk with somebody that is really attractive to the point that Hector's gonna be jealous, then I can guarantee you that nothing will have changed. In all honesty, judging of how the only elements that this episode does better than the Loud House is honestly a missed opportunity that just isn't that important in comparison to Rita's character from the Loud House episode, is really saying something. Granted, I didn't talk about Brad's character, but to tell you the truth, knowing forward that he only appears once and he's mainly a tool and nothing else is really disappointing. Like, one of the reasons why I have a difficult time finding any adjustment with these one-off characters in the later seasons is mainly the fact that they have little to work with, which for me personally really sums up the nature of why the later seasons, where they include a character that only appears once and they really wanted to give out a good impression to the audience, just is honestly really sad and disappointing. Believe me when I say this episode would have been much more better if it focuses on Rita's character rather than Lynn's character. Anyway, that was yet another long Lautas vs. Casagrandes project, and to tell you the truth, if I really saved this for February, I'm pretty sure it would have been a little too late, considering that I've been thinking about this road trip episode, just like the Bizarratorium episode, to the point that I wanted to get my points across. But unlike the Bizarratorium where I released it in July, several months ago, I really need to take a breather when it comes to these videos, especially when it comes to schedules. Keep in mind, by the time of this recording, I didn't watch all of the Season 7 episodes and only watch a few because I'm not even trying to binge watch the Loud House like I used to, especially since I didn't watch the final episodes of Season 6. Besides, I still have multiple ideas by doing more of these videos, even though I've been doing that throughout the majority of this year. Keep in mind, it's still difficult to change my schedule style, knowing full well that I still have less positive things to say when it comes to other media, but then again, you're gonna have to wait until I discuss my plans of 2024 by the end of this year. It's mainly my thought process of what I'm gonna be doing next, involving the Lautas vs. Casagrandes. I'm giving From Brad to Ross a 5 out of 10, while the Casagrandes gets a 3 out of 10.